A mother's desperate cry pierces the howling blizzard, her infant son clinging to life against her back. Nora Hale, a young woman scarred by betrayal, flees through the snow-choked San Andres Mountains, hunted for a crime she didn't commit. In the heart of this frozen wilderness, a chance encounter with a condemned warrior will test her courage and redefine her destiny. What she discovers in the shadow of death will echo beyond the mountains, forging a legacy of survival and sacrifice. Where are you tuning in from? Subscribe now to uncover how Nora's choice reshapes her fate. Will she conquer the wilderness, or will it claim her? The blizzard screamed through the San Andres Mountains, a banshee of ice and wind that clawed at the world, burying trails and dreams alike in a shroud of white. Snow fell in sheets, thick enough to choke a man's breath, and the cold bit like a rattler, sinking fangs deep into bone. Nora Hale staggered through the drifts, her boots, tattered relics of better days, sinking ankle-deep with every step. The weight of her infant son, bundled in a threadbare wool blanket against her back, pressed heavier than the storm itself. His tiny body, barely a year old, shivered against her spine, his whimpers swallowed by the wind's howl. She tightened the frayed coat around her shoulders, its seams splitting under the strain of the New Mexico Territory's winter of 1878. Nora's breath came in ragged gasps, each one a prayer to keep moving. Her hands, raw and cracked from the cold, gripped the straps of the makeshift sling holding her boy. She'd named him Caleb, after her father, a man who taught her to track deer and face fear before cholera stole him on the Oregon Trail. Now, Caleb was all she had left, the only spark of hope in a world that had turned its back on her. The mining camp she'd fled, its smoke still stinging her memory, had branded her a killer. Her husband, Amos, a whiskey-soaked brute, had died in a fire that devoured their shack. She'd pushed him, yes, when his fist aimed for Caleb's cradle. But the flames? They were an accident. A lantern was knocked in the scuffle. The camp didn't care. They saw a woman who dared to fight back and called it murder. A bounty hung over her head now, a noose waiting in the shadows. The wind shifted, hurling snow into her face like 1,000 tiny knives. Nora squinted, her eyes stinging, searching for anything, a ridge, a tree, a break in the endless white that might offer shelter. Her legs burned, muscles screaming with each step, but stopping meant death. Not just for her, but for Caleb, whose faint cries had grown weaker, a knife twisting in her gut. She whispered to him, her voice hoarse, "Hold on, little man. We ain't done yet." The words were more for her than him, a tether to keep her from sinking into despair. The mountains didn't care about her innocence or her child's life. They were as merciless as the men hunting her. A shape loomed through the haze, a jagged outcrop, its edges softened by snow, but solid enough to promise refuge. Nora stumbled toward it, her boots catching on hidden rocks, her body swaying under the weight of exhaustion. She reached the base, a shallow overhang barely enough to shield them from the storm's worst. She sank to her knees, pulling Caleb from her back to cradle him against her chest. His face was pale, his lips tinged blue, but his eyes, wide and trusting, locked onto hers. She pressed her cheek to his, willing her warmth into him, her hands trembling as she tucked the blanket tighter. "We'll make it," she murmured, though the words tasted like a lie. The storm roared on, but beneath its fury, Nora heard something else, a low, guttural sound, not wind, but something alive. Her heart lurched. She fumbled for the small axe tucked in her belt, its handle worn smooth from years of chopping kindling. The blade was dull, but it was all she had besides a rusty knife she'd scavenged from the camp. Her eyes darted to the darkness beyond the overhang, where snow swirled like ghosts. Bears roamed these mountains, grizzlies fat with hunger before winter's sleep. She'd seen their tracks before the storm buried them, deep claw marks that spoke of raw power. If one found them now, she'd have no chance. But running wasn't an option either. Not with Caleb. Not in this blizzard. She forced herself to breathe, to listen. The sound didn't come again, but the weight of it lingered, a warning carved into the silence. Nora pulled Caleb closer, her mind racing. She'd heard stories of women who survived the frontier, women who faced worse than storms and beasts. If they could do it, so could she. And if you're out there listening to this tale unfold, I hope you'll stick with us. Hit that subscribe button. It means the world to keep these stories alive, and I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Are you in a city, a small town, or somewhere as wild as this? Nora's fight is just beginning, and trust me, you'll want to see where this trail leads. The overhang offered little warmth, but it was enough to keep the snow from burying them. Nora's fingers, numb and clumsy, worked to adjust Caleb's blanket, her eyes never leaving the darkness. She thought of the camp, the men who'd spat at her, the women who'd turned away. They'd called her a curse, a widow who'd brought death. But she wasn't running from them. She was running for Caleb, for a life where he'd never know his father's fists. The wind howled, carrying the scent of pine and something sharper, like blood on snow. Nora gripped her axe tighter, her resolve hardening. Whatever came, storm, bear, or bounty hunter, she'd face it. She was Nora Hale, and she wasn't done fighting. The wind's howl softened to a low moan, but the cold tightened its grip, sinking claws into Nora Hale's bones as she huddled beneath the overhang with Caleb pressed against her chest. The darkness was thick, a living thing that swallowed the world beyond the faint glow of snow. Her axe rested heavy in her lap, its blade glinting dully in the starlight that fought through the storm. She strained to hear that guttural sound again, her pulse hammering, but only the wind answered. Then, a shadow shifted beyond the overhang. Not beast, but something else. Something upright, deliberate. Nora's breath caught, her grip on the axe tightening as she peered into the night. A wooden post jutted from the snow like the spine of some forgotten beast, its silhouette stark against the white. At its base, something moved, slow, pained, human. Nora's heart lurched. She eased Caleb into the crook of her arm, his warmth a fragile anchor, and crept forward, the snow crunching under her boots. As she drew closer, the shape resolved into a man, his bronze skin slick with blood, his wrists bound tight around the post with coarse rope. His chest was bare, slashed with wounds that wept red into the snow, his breath coming in shallow puffs of white. He was Apache, his dark eyes sharp despite the pain, locking onto hers with a mix of defiance and resignation. "Who did this?" Nora whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind. The man's gaze flickered, assessing her, her torn coat, the child in her arms, the axe in her hand. "Go," he rasped, his English broken but clear. "Grizzly comes. Blood calls it." His words were a warning, not a plea, but they rooted Nora to the spot. She saw the tracks around the post. Boots, not paws, fresh enough to hold their shape in the snow. Hunters or rangers, men who'd left this warrior as bait, a cruel offering to the mountain's hunger. Nora's mind raced. She could leave, slip back to the overhang, pray the storm hid her and Caleb. But the man's eyes held her, not begging, but demanding she see him, not as a sacrifice, but as a person. She thought of the mining camp, the faces that had turned from her, condemning her without proof. This man, tied and bleeding, was no different, judged for who he was, not what he'd done. Caleb stirred, a soft whimper breaking the silence, and Nora's resolve hardened. She couldn't save herself from the camp's lies, but she could save him. She knelt, setting Caleb gently in the snow, his blanket tucked tight. The axe's handle was cold as she hacked at the ropes, her hands clumsy with frost. The fibers frayed, then snapped, and the man slumped forward, catching himself on bloodied palms. "Tazhi," he said, touching his chest, his voice rough as gravel. "I'm Nora." she replied, helping him to his feet. His weight leaned heavily on her, his wounds staining her coat, but he moved with a stubborn strength, refusing to collapse. The wind carried a new sound, a low, rumbling growl that froze Nora's blood. Tazhi's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the darkness. "It's coming," he said, his voice steady despite the pain. He pointed to the axe in her hand. "Keep it ready." Nora nodded, her heart pounding as she scooped Caleb up, his small body trembling. Tazhi staggered toward the overhang, his steps uneven but deliberate, as he guided them back to the shallow shelter. He sank against the rock wall, his breath labored, and pointed to a small flint tied to his swollen wrist. "Fire," he said. "We need it." Nora fumbled with the flint, her fingers numb, striking it against the axe's blade until sparks caught on a scrap of dry moss from her pack. The flame flickered, weak but growing, casting shadows that danced like specters. Tazhi's face was gaunt in the light, his scars telling stories of battles fought and survived. "Why'd they do this?" Nora asked, feeding twigs to the fire. Tazhi's jaw tightened. "I scouted for soldiers, refused to lead them to my people's village. They called it treason." His words were bitter, spitting out like venom. "Left me for the bear to settle their score." Nora's stomach twisted. She saw her own reflection in his story, cast out, condemned, left to die for choosing right over wrong. The fire crackled, its warmth a frail defense against the cold, but it steadied her. Caleb's breathing softened, his tiny chest rising and falling. Tazhi watched the boy, his expression unreadable, then met Nora's eyes. "You didn't run," he said, almost a question. "Neither did you," she shot back, her voice firm. A faint nod was his only reply, but it carried a weight of understanding. Two souls bound by the choice to fight when the world demanded they break. The growl came again, closer now, a promise of death stalking through the snow. Tazhi's hand closed around the knife at his belt, its blade chipped but sharp. Nora gripped her axe, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight, where the storm and the beast waited to claim them. The fire's frail glow flickered in the overhang, a trembling pulse against the San Andres' frozen night. Nora Hale clutched her axe, its handle slick with sweat despite the cold, her eyes locked on the swirling snow where the grizzly's growl had sounded. Closer, hungrier. Tazhi, bloodied but unyielding, crouched beside her, his chipped knife gleaming in the firelight. Caleb, swaddled in his blanket, stirred in the crook of the rock, his soft breaths a quiet defiance against the storm's roar. The darkness beyond the overhang pulsed with menace, and Nora's heart thundered, every nerve screaming that death was stalking closer. From the pine thicket, the beast emerged, a grizzly, massive as a whiskey barrel, its fur matted with snow, eyes burning red in the dim light. Its shoulders rolled like a landslide, claws raking the ground as it swung its head, sniffing the air thick with Tazhi's blood. The bear's growl rattled the stones, a sound that promised no mercy, only hunger sharpened by winter's edge. Nora's grip tightened, her knuckles white. She glanced at Tazhi, his face carved from pain and resolve, his body coiled despite the wounds leaking red down his side. "Stay back," he hissed, his voice low but steady. "Protect the boy." Nora's instinct screamed to shield Caleb, to huddle by the fire and pray the beast passed. But the bear's eyes locked onto Tazhi, drawn by the scent of blood, and she knew retreat wasn't an option. If the grizzly reached him, it wouldn't stop. It would tear through them all, Caleb included. Her son's faint whimper cut through her fear, sharp as a blade. She wouldn't let him die here, not after everything she'd fought to escape. Nora stood, planting herself between the fire and the bear, the axe raised. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice cracking but fierce, echoing off the rock walls. She stomped, kicking snow toward the beast, willing it to turn. The grizzly's head swung, its gaze pinning her. It huffed, a cloud of steam bursting from its jaws, teeth like daggers flashing in the firelight. Nora's stomach lurched, but she held her ground, her boots sinking into the snow. She grabbed a burning branch from the fire, its embers hissing, and thrust it toward the bear, the flames dancing wildly. The beast roared, rearing to its full height. 9 feet of raw power, claws slashing the air. Nora's heart pounded, but she stepped forward, swinging the branch, the heat searing her hand. "Come on, you bastard!" she yelled, her voice raw with defiance. The bear dropped to all fours, charging her with a speed that belied its size. Nora swung the axe, aiming for its shoulder. The blade bit deep, blood spraying across the snow, but the grizzly's momentum sent her sprawling. She hit the ground hard, the air driven from her lungs, the axe skittering out of reach. Caleb's cry pierced the chaos, and Nora scrambled to her knees, her hands clawing through the snow for the weapon. The bear turned, its roar shaking the earth, and lunged toward her, its jaws wide. Tazhi's voice cut through the din, sharp and urgent. "The knife! My belt!" Nora lunged, her fingers closing around the rusty knife strapped to Tazhi's side. She slashed at the ropes, still clinging to his wrists, freeing him fully. Tazhi staggered to his feet, snatching the axe from the snow with a grunt of pain. The bear wheeled, its eyes wild, and charged again. Nora stumbled back, shielding Caleb, who wailed in terror. Tazhi roared, a sound not of man but of thunder, primal and fierce, and hurled himself at the beast. He swung the axe with both hands, the blade arcing through the air to bury itself in the grizzly's skull. A sickening crunch echoed, and the bear staggered, its massive frame swaying, then collapsed, its final breath steaming in the cold. Silence fell, heavy as the snow. Nora knelt, gasping, her hands shaking as she pulled Caleb close, his cries softening against her chest. Tazhi slumped against the rock, the axe clattering from his bloodied hands, his chest heaving. Blood pooled beneath him, mingling with the bear's, staining the snow crimson. Nora met his eyes, seeing not just survival but something deeper, a shared defiance, a refusal to let the wilderness win. The fire crackled, its light casting their shadows long across the overhang, 2 figures bound by a moment that had rewritten their fates. Outside, the storm howled on, but the immediate threat was dead, its body a dark mound in the snow, a testament to their fight. The grizzly lay dead, a dark mountain in the snow, its blood steaming in the frigid air. Nora Hale clutched Caleb to her chest, his cries fading to soft hiccups as the fire's warmth seeped into his tiny frame. Tazhi leaned against the overhang's rock wall, his breath shallow, his wounds glistening in the flickering light. The storm raged beyond their shelter, but the immediate terror had passed, leaving a quiet heaviness with survival's weight. Nora's hands trembled as she adjusted Caleb's blanket, her eyes darting to Tazhi, who stared into the fire, his face etched with pain and something deeper, gratitude, perhaps, or recognition. They stumbled to a nearby cave, its mouth half hidden by snow-crusted pines. Tazhi moved first, his steps faltering but deliberate, guiding Nora through the drifts. Inside, the air was damp but still, a reprieve from the wind's relentless bite. Nora set Caleb down on a bed of pine needles, checking his face for warmth, his breath steady now. Tazhi knelt by a pile of dry twigs he'd scavenged, his swollen fingers working the flint from his wrist with practiced precision. Sparks flew, catching the tinder, and a small fire bloomed, its glow pushing back the cave's shadows. Nora watched him, noting the careful way he fed the flames, as if coaxing life from the wilderness itself. She tore strips from her coat's hem, wincing at the fabric's protest, and began binding Tazhi's wounds. The gashes on his chest were deep, raw from the ropes and the cold, but he didn't flinch as she pressed the cloth to his skin. "Hold still," she muttered, her voice rough but steady. Tazhi's eyes met hers, dark and unreadable, but he nodded, letting her work. Caleb stirred, his small hand grasping at the air, and Nora's heart clenched. She'd fought for him, for them both, and now, in this cave, they were alive. 3 souls defying the mountain's hunger. "Why'd they turn on you?" Nora asked, tying off a bandage. Tazhi's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the fire. "I scouted for the army," he said, his voice low, each word carved from memory. "Led them through these mountains, kept their men alive. But when they wanted my people's village, women, children, elders, I said no. They called it betrayal. Tied me to that post to let the bear judge me." His words were bitter, sharp as the knife at his belt. Nora's hands stilled, her own past echoing in his story. "They blamed me too," she said, almost a whisper. "My husband, Amos, beat me, beat Caleb. One night I fought back, knocked over a lantern. Fire took the camp, took him. They called me a murderer, put a price on my head." Tazhi looked at her, his eyes softening, not with pity but with understanding. "You fought for your son," he said. "I fought for my kin. They punish us for choosing life over their rules." Nora nodded, the weight of their shared exile settling between them. She checked Caleb again, his cheeks flushed with warmth, his breathing calm. The fire crackled, its smoke curling toward the cave's ceiling, and for a moment, the world felt small, contained within these walls of stone and flame. A distant thud broke the silence. Hooves, heavy and deliberate, cutting through the storm's wail. Tazhi's head snapped up, his hand closing around his knife. "Rangers," he said, his voice hard. "They're back for the bear, or for me." Nora's pulse quickened, her eyes darting to Caleb. She grabbed the axe, its handle cold against her palm, and moved to the cave's mouth. "They'll find us," she whispered. Tazhi shook his head, his expression grim. "If they see you with me, they'll kill you both. Hide the boy. Stay low." Nora hesitated, her instinct to protect warring with the urge to stand beside him. She tucked Caleb deeper into the cave, behind a jut of rock, his blanket blending with the shadows. The hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by voices, gruff, edged with menace. Nora peered through the cave's entrance, the snow blurring the shapes of 3 men on horseback, their rifles glinting in the faint moonlight. Tazhi crouched beside her, his knife ready, his body tense despite the blood seeping through his bandages. "They'll check the post," he murmured. "Find the bear, then they'll track us." Nora's grip on the axe tightened, her mind racing. She'd faced a grizzly and won. She could face these men. But the stakes were higher now, not just her life, but Caleb's and Tazhi's, a man who'd already been sentenced to die. She turned to him, her voice low but fierce. "We face them together, or we don't face them at all." Tazhi's eyes searched hers, weighing her resolve. He nodded once, a silent pact forged in the firelight. The voices outside grew closer, their words sharp with intent, hunters seeking not just a trophy, but vengeance. Nora and Tazhi braced themselves, 2 outcasts bound by survival, ready to carve their justice from the unforgiving snow. The cave's firelight flickered, casting jagged shadows as the rangers' voices grew louder, their words slicing through the storm's dying wail. Nora Hale gripped her axe, her heart a war drum, while Tazhi crouched beside her, his knife a glint of defiance in the dark. Caleb lay hidden behind the rock, his blanket a frail shield against the cold and the men hunting them. The hoofbeats stopped, replaced by the crunch of boots on snow. 3 men, their rifles clinking, their intent as sharp as the wind. Nora and Tazhi exchanged a glance, a silent vow to fight or die together, 2 outcasts carved from the same unforgiving stone. The lead ranger, a grizzled man with a scar splitting his brow, stepped into view, his rifle raised, eyes scanning the cave's mouth. "Show yourself, Apache," he barked, his voice raw with contempt. "And the woman, Where's she at? Nora's breath caught, but she stood, axe in hand, stepping into the firelight. Here, she said, her voice steady as iron. And I ain't your prisoner. The ranger's eyes narrowed, taking in her torn coat, the child's blanket peeking from the shadows. You're the murderess, he sneered. Helping a savage. You'll hang with him. Tazhi moved like a shadow, his knife flashing as he lunged, knocking the rifle from the ranger's hands. A shot rang out from the second man, grazing Tazhi's cheek, blood welling bright against his skin. Nora swung her axe, catching the second ranger's arm, forcing him to drop his weapon with a howl. The third man hesitated, his rifle wavering, but Tazhi was already on him, wrenching the gun free and slamming its butt into the man's chest. The rangers stumbled back, disarmed but not broken, their eyes burning with hate. You'll pay for this, the leader spat, retreating into the snow. Both of you. The cave fell silent, the fires crackle. The only sound as Nora's hands shook, the axe heavy in her grip. Tazhi wiped blood from his cheek, his breathing ragged but controlled. They'll come back, he said, his voice low, like gravel underfoot. More men, more guns. Nora nodded, her mind racing. She checked Caleb, his small face calm in sleep, untouched by the violence. We can't stay here, she said, her voice firm despite the fear clawing her gut. Tazhi met her eyes, his gaze steady. You go east. Find a town, a new start. I'll lead them west, into the mountains. Nora shook her head, fierce. I didn't cut you free to run alone. We're in this together. Tazhi's expression softened, a rare crack in his stoic mask. He reached into his belt, pulling out a small Apache amulet, a carved stone hand, its lines worn smooth by time. For your son, he said, pressing it into her palm. It means life, tied to the earth. You fought for him, for me. Now fight for yourself. Nora closed her fingers around the amulet, its weight grounding her, a promise of survival. As dawn broke, the storm's fury faded, the sky cracking open to spill pale light across the blood-streaked snow. Nora bundled Caleb tightly, his warmth steady against her chest. Tazhi saddled a stolen ranger's horse, its breath steaming in the cold. They stood at the cave's mouth, the world stretching before them, east to uncertain safety, west to the wild heart of the mountains. You could come with me, Nora said, her voice quiet but sure. Tazhi shook his head, his eyes distant. My people need me. The army won't stop hunting. I'll draw them off, give you time. Their eyes met, no words needed. They were bound not by promises, but by the shared weight of survival, of choosing life when death was the easier path. Nora touched the amulet, its carved hand warm against her skin. If anyone asks, she said, I'll say the land saved us. Tazhi's lips twitched, almost a smile. No, you saved me. The land just watched. He mounted the horse, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun, and rode west, vanishing into the pines. Nora turned east, Caleb's weight a steady anchor. The snow crunched under her boots, each step a defiance of the bounty on her head, the lies of the mining camp, the wilderness that had tried to claim her. The amulet rested in her pocket, a reminder of Tazhi's lesson. Justice wasn't given, it was taken, carved from the raw edge of survival. As she walked, the mountains loomed behind her, silent witnesses to a woman who'd faced a bear, defied death, and chosen a path where her son would grow strong, carrying the legacy of two outcasts who'd found humanity in the wild. Nora Hale's journey through the storm, from outcast to survivor, leaves us with a tale of courage carved in blood and snow. What did her defiance stir in you? Did Tazhi's choice to fight for her resonate, or was it the land's silent witness that lingered? Share your thoughts below. Where are you tuning in from, and what moved you most? Your voices keep these stories alive. I'm grateful for every moment you spent with this tale, and I look forward to meeting you again in the next chapter of the Wild Frontier. Until then, keep carrying your own amulet of survival wherever your path leads.